15 minutes to the top of the hour, we pick up our conversations here on Morning at NTV, Thursday's edition, a unique Thursday in the history of our country, especially as far as judiciary and justice are concerned. Over the past few weeks, national attention has been drawn and fixed on Gaba, where Uganda's mobile court has actually been sitting to hear the case of Christopher Okello, one of the most closely followed criminal trials in recent memory. Now, that note, this case is not only significant for its subject matter, but also for how justice has been delivered so far. And the mobile court system designed to bring judicial services closer to communities has been put to a real-time test under a public scrutiny. So today, the whole country is waiting judgment on this matter. We sit back and get to examine the broader picture, especially around mobile courts and mobile justice, improving efficiency, accessibility, as well as transparency in Uganda's judicial system, especially as far as criminal cases are concerned. Now, to help us unpack this, we're being joined by a veteran journalist who has been covering this case step by step. Jackson Onyango, a reporter with Nation Media Group, who has been closely following the proceedings at Gaba for every court sitting. He has been sitting there in a court. Jackson, good morning to you, and thank you so much for being with us here.
Good morning, Priscilla.
Okay, so first of all, I want to understand from a journalistic point of view, seeing as we do have our day that is around the corner in a few hours, celebrating journalism. What has been your experience interacting with this criminal case of this nature?
I think it has been like any other court because the processes are actually the conventional ones, other than the sitting that is outside the designated court premises, like where we have our high court today. So the other routine is that, you know, the court has been starting at 9 most of the time, except for the vagaries of weather. We sometimes would have the starting time pushed. But also, of course, this has been a court where you have members of the public attending in large numbers as compared to the court, the fact that it has been taken closer to them. And this is a matter of interest to them other than the rest of the country. It is so close to them. So, and at a certain point, of course, like you have asked from the journalistic point, and which still would apply to the conventional system, is that, you know, you have those emotional moments for you as a person, but also to the members of the community. For example, when the exhibits were being presented, you know, you have these stained clothes of the toddlers, or Nyumi himself, you know what? So that kind of, even as we had moved on for that period, because I think the exhibits were presented on the 8th day. So from the first day, kind of people had moved on, and you would say, okay, the mood is now relaxed. But when those exhibits were presented, you know, it brings back the fresh memories of what actually happened during that day when the toddlers were attacked.
And from a journalistic perspective now, when you look at how the case has been, you know, unfolding, what's the experience like covering a mobile court session versus covering the traditional courtrooms?
The experience is pretty the same. The only difference with this case has been unique in a way. So with our conventional courts, you have a situation where a case would drag on, for example, for a year or even more. Or if you look at the cases of Nigeria, for instance, who was murdered, if you look at the case of the former assistant director of public prosecutions, Joan Kagezi, the case dragged on, I think, until today. It is still in court, you know. So this particular one we are talking of today being the judgment day. And whereas the number of days that the court actually sat were 10. The hearing took a period of 10 days, spread across the month of April, because this murder took place on 2nd. So to me, this in a way, in a civilian court, I think it is a record, you know, that a case has been heard in such a short period of time. Of course, that brings in, so that means we have been spending longer hours. Under the normal circumstances, you would, for example, on the day of the hearing or the starting day, you have the accused taking their plea. They either accept or deny. And then from there, the normalities, how the court will proceed and so on, and then you take a break. The next day, the prosecution presents you the number of the witnesses they have, 1 or 2, and then you break. So you would have a situation where court starts from maybe 9 until 2, and then you break off. This court, like let me say on the last day of the hearing, you had the defense present their witnesses. Of course, when they came to court that day, they told us that Onyum did not have any other witnesses other than the 2 who had appeared, that one of them being his elder brother and the other one a street child, and then himself as the 3rd. So we expected 2 more witnesses to appear. Unfortunately, they couldn't be reached by the court. So immediately we rolled into submissions. And from here, you do see that the defense appeared sort of not to be prepared to submit on that day, and that's why they asked for 3 hours to prepare their submissions. And when we returned at 3, it was a marathon. You know, they submitted, this prosecution has to rebuff, also, you know, submit their position. From there, the assessors had to give their decision. Under the normal court processes, you would have maybe assessors give their position the next day. This time, the court went up to 8. I'd never seen that myself.
Okay.
So it is a long time that, you know, as a journalist, you have to keep there, tracking each and every bit of the proceeding.
Okay, so speaking of tracking the proceedings, when the first court session sat in Gaba, in which Christopher was to let us know if he pleads guilty or not, to which he said he does not plead guilty to the 4 counts of murder that were being charged against him. That alone caught people by storm. I remember people texting me and telling me, how can this guy, because you and I were doing this live on the first day, and so people were aggrieved by just that one statement. This is to ask, what have been the other significant and unique highlights on the case of Uganda versus Christopher Okello so far?
Yeah, so like you have said, you know, I think everybody was taken by surprise. If you remember, some government officials had actually indicated that this case was going only to take a period of 1 week and it is concluded. That has not been the case. We are talking of end of April now. So, you know, I think the expectation was, you know, Okello was arrested at the scene of the crime, and that particularly made him guilty at that very point. People thought that, you know, this is an obvious case. It is not a case where, you know, the security personnel went hunting for the person who committed the murder and so on. Okello was got at the scene, and to everybody that was clear that he's the guy. So when he's presented in court, he will obviously admit, you know, plead guilty. Okello did not plead guilty. And therefore that meant that the normal court processes would have to be rolled. Now, that is not something that you take one day. For example, the prosecution had a total of 18 witnesses who appeared before the court. These were parents, these were the school management, the caretakers. You had the landlords who were brought, 2 of them, where Okello rented between February and April, early April, when he committed the murder. You have a car hire dealer who rented out his car to Okello, the RAV4 that was used. And then the security personnel who took on the investigations. You have the psychiatrist who appeared there. So, and you know, it is not about asking them one question. This had, you know, the prosecution is trying to make its case. It is trying to pin down this person that is actually the suspect. So to the members of the public, that wouldn't make sense, because they thought this guy was now be there. It is a matter of either he pleads guilty, or if he doesn't plead guilty, quickly the prosecution has to show that this man was here, we nabbed him, and the court takes a decision. But you know, all the other processes, the defense. But what is interesting about this case, like we have been reporting, what I can say from of course, the judgment will be, it is up to the trial judge, Alice Komuhanji Hauka, to give the decision today. But from my point, what is clear is that there is no denial that Okello committed the murder. However, what the defense has taken as their line of defense is that Okello might have been mentally unstable. Now, I think that's where Justice Auha is going to base her decision on whether to rule that Okello was mentally unstable or mentally stable. Now, I think the next question you'll ask me then, what happens in both scenarios? Because it seems murder has been proven that it took place, and nobody is denying, because the defense did not deny that. Their push is that this man is not okay. At one point, there is information that he had been admitted to Butavika Mental Hospital.
Then there's the element of sickle cells.
And then there is an element of all those issues came up, and you know, even the psychiatrists were being asked whether it is possible that sickle cell can actually make yes to that. But you see, I found that question myself interesting, because I mean, any of us here today is a potential culprit.
Yeah, I mean, if we're to really do self-reflection, when you are actually terribly ill, your mentor is also
so that question, you know, I don't know how the psychiatrists would have answered. Of course, they say yes, and it is a risk factor. But all of us are at risk. You know, people suffer from depression, even excitement itself can lead to that, because we're hearing things like if you are overexcited, it could also signal that there is something that is problematic with you. So basically, all those made the case, it was a devastating situation, but you know, you get to learn from this process. Of course, also, Uganda Law Society, you remember, also protested that, you know, this court, the mobile court, shouldn't have been sitting in Igaba. They termed it as mob justice and lynching, that it would not be a fair trial to the accused. But at this point, that raises a lot of debate based on how we saw the proceeding of the court, because somehow members of the public, I can say, managed to control themselves, mostly during the presentation by the prosecution. The only incident where you would have them somehow, you know, raise concern is when the defense started presenting. Of course, there are those, like when the parents of the children, for example, are being asked, "Where is your child?" I think members of public did not expect such a question to come, because to them it is obvious that these children were killed, and therefore it is known to everybody. But you see, the prosecution had to present its case, you know, to justify that, you know, this, to prove that these children were killed.
Okay. On that note, during the court sessions, there was a tragic incident on one of the fateful days where a journalist, you know, had to be caught up in the middle of a vehicle not having brakes in control. Have you been able to follow up on his condition right now, and what does this in tandem say about the safety as well as, you know, the position of practicing or doing your job in this line without expecting such things, and yet occurrences such as unique to this case did happen?
First of all, I think, you know, in the beginning, there was this concern also from our point of view that maybe this was not the right place to have the trial take place, because you have members of the public who are highly charged, maybe, because of the situation. But there was deployment of security personnel. So in terms of our safety and those of the officers of the court and another person, we would have deemed it that we were really secure, except for that incident that happened out of the blue. Nobody expected that such a thing, because we are almost, the court is sitting closer to the lakeside. We are just at the shores of Lake Victoria. But then this incident happened, and it caught many by surprise, actually. I can say that somehow it was a terrible incident, but we thank God that the casualty, the number of people injured or affected by this incident was not as high as we had seen it. Because, you know, when this particular vehicle failed to brake, the direction it took is where all the journalists were gathered. And I calculated actually the time frame it took between where the vehicle failed to brake and when it came to a halt. It took about 12 seconds. So you can see that the reaction someone needed to take to ensure that they are safe, it was really limited. Yeah, but generally speaking, I think we have been safe. But when the second incident of the storm happened, then you are hearing a lot of things, you know, say this Okello man is not okay. This guy somewhere, I think he was doing rituals and his gods are not happy, they still want blood.
Actually, I remember the defense team first getting into a prayer session.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and, you know, having
Randa
Shakarava was just so to deal with the situation of their
So that from, of course, we live in a society where our God works, but other people's gods also work. You cannot dispute them. So if the people are talking of spirit, I mean, in the Bible, the spirits were cast away. So I mean, there is actual existence of spirits that really work, and that's why we're always praying to God to keep us safe. So when you start seeing such, actually I told my colleagues that if a third incident had happened, and then this would be beyond normal, it would not just be a coincidence. So there is that fear that you have to deal with at the individual level.
Okay, today's Judgment Day. What time has been set for the ruling, and what should the public expect out of this court decision?
We expect Justice Alice Komuhanji to deliver a judgment at 10. That's when the court has been scheduled to kick off. How long it will take, we all wait to see, because, you know, she has to go all through the submissions, what the prosecution presented, the submissions from the defense, and then give her own judgment. Sometimes this can take quite a time. So basically, maybe in the afternoon, that's when we shall have a clear picture of what the judgment will look like. Whether she will also decide to sentence the sentence, in case Okello is found guilty, whether a sentence will be issued immediately. I think it will be issued immediately, but also we wait to see what happens.
And finally, what does this case mean, especially for the future of mobile court justice in Uganda? Because initially, the judiciary's voice was on extending this kind of justice to the most remote or underserved communities and areas.
Yes.
So the first one now being, you know, different from all the elements that were defining mobile courts from the judiciary's angle.
I think mobile courts, if it is to serve underprivileged areas, it is a good thing. Because if you are going to have cases tried within a space of 1 month, and everybody is dry and clean, and then it is a good thing. But maybe to agree with the Uganda Law members of some of the members of Uganda Law Society, is that we shall need to talk to them. Maybe later they will be featured here on NTV or in the coming days, or even from the defense who have actually practiced this, whether in some way it limited them. Because you know why sometimes you want to sit in the conventional courtrooms is that you have, for example, ease of access to the library, because during the course of this trial, there are times when the defense was asked about particular laws or in their details, what they were quoting, and they would say, we don't have the law books here with us. Maybe if we were in the conventional court, that would be different. But I think, generally speaking, for places like Kampala, I don't think it would be a good idea for government to spend our money, within Kampala, where you have the courtrooms, and then you decide to go and sit outside there, where you're going to hire a public address system. You need to hire the tent, sometimes maybe even the space where you'll be sitting. So for the underserved areas, it is a good idea. For areas where the courts are already in place, I think they should just use those facilities.
Okay.
Yes, that will save us from maybe the expenses, and we need to hear from the judiciary, maybe from this particular one as a benchmark, how much they could have incurred in terms of costs.
All right, Jackson Onyango, thank you so much for sitting down with us and give us your 2 cents on the coverage of Uganda versus Christopher Okello Onyum, whose judgment is set for today, this morning at exactly 10 o'clock, being presided over by Justice Alice Komhandri Hahwa. As the country is awaiting this judgment, this moment is going beyond this single verdict. It's raising broader questions about how justice is being delivered, how accessible it is, how efficient it can be, and how institutions do adopt to meet the needs of the people. And so the mobile court system, still relatively new, is not only being tested in the law, but also in public confidence. We await to see the direction that this case will take. We take a short breather, but